Welcome to Season 5 of the Life Giver Podcast, a place for honest conversation and hope that will breathe life back into your military or first responder marriage. Too often, I hear that service families have taken the vulnerable step to give counseling a try, only to feel like the clinician did not understand the service lifestyle. After going through the same frustration, I created the Life Giver Clinician Directory, a fully searchable map and directory of clinicians that are military spouses, veterans, first responder spouses, or civilians that have experience working with families just like yours. The directory even has a place where you can recommend clinicians you've loved and would recommend to others. If you are looking for help, simply head over to search the Life Giver Clinician Directory at www.life-giver.org. Welcome to Season 5 of the Life Giver Podcast. This is your host, Corey Weathers. I am so excited to begin a new season talking all about marriage, talking about ways that you can breathe life into your family and in your home. And today I have a really interesting discussion with my good friend, Dr. Kendra Lowe. She is an Air Force spouse, but also a veteran herself. And she has a doctorate in educational leadership with a focus on psychological studies. And she has come out with a new book that we're going to be talking all about because she's been catching on to some things that I've been noticing too. And we found each other and we've been completely nerding out on all things of spouse wellness and military family wellness. And she's going to unpack a little bit of her findings today. But she wrote Wake Up, Kick Ass, and Repeat, a guide to self-perseverance within the military spouse life cycle. So Kendra, I am so excited to have you here. I have read some of your book. It's coming out. The full book is coming out soon. And I'm just so excited about what you have found in your research and the message that you're spreading. And more than anything, that you have created a way for us to really start tackling what it means to address spouse wellness, military spouse wellness. So I'm so excited, but I think a place for us to start is for you to share a little bit more about your journey. And so I know that you were a veteran yourself. So would you mind just starting with your experience as a veteran and what it was like for you to transition from being a service member to a military spouse? Because from what I've seen and heard, that was a little bit of a transition for you as well. So welcome to the podcast. Thanks for joining me.
Oh, and I want to start out with certainly thank you so much for having me today. I've followed you as well, and I'm just so excited to be a part of this. And I really appreciate you giving me a chance to talk with you today and share what I've been working on really for the past 10 years. And as you said, being a veteran, there are definitely stressors that are there when you're active duty. And my husband and I were dual. He was active as well as myself. And so there was hard stressors associated with that and juggling it. But what I became really surprised with is when I transitioned out, how much almost more stress I experienced as a military spouse, and was surprised by it. And I really wanted to understand it better as I got to know other military spouses and get closer connections. And as being a military spouse, saw just the significance of it. So I had a chance when I had my master's degree, and I started researching it at a lower level with 50 spouses, and saw some concerning trends that popped up, kind of telling me, yes, this stress is real and it's significant. But again, with any type of research, it could be just preliminary findings. So I had a chance with my doctorate to expand it, and I interviewed 210 spouses that took a stress inventory as well as worked with me. And I did follow-up questions on demographics, and found that the trends were continued. And so what those are in the book that I'm trying to get that message out is that 1 in 4 of our spouses are at clinically elevated levels of stress, and 1 in 5 are those that would warrant professional follow-up and intervention. And so when you comparatively look at that, it's double that of the civilian population. And again, that's according to my research. But I was so shocked that the trends continued and that our spouses are just functioning under such a layer of stress. And so part of it is me wanting to talk about and validate it. Right. So I had a chance to kind of brief on it and talk about it. And I had so many spouses come up and tell their stories afterwards and say, I'm so excited that you're talking about it and sharing about it, because not only do I know that I'm not alone, but I had spouses say that, the more we talk about it, the more we share, the more spouses are even coming up to them and sharing their stories. And it is significant. And I had the chance again to go forward and speak at a couple other squadrons, and the spouses, the response was amazing. But I got that follow up of, okay, so you're giving us this problem, and we're stressed and it's significant, and it's the now what. And so I wanted to build a now what. And the book really is an 8-week a guide to work through individually or with a group of peers. And it's the now what. It's 8 weeks of reflection questions and actual psychometric tools to help you rethink the way that we deal with stress. And when I developed it, I kept thinking about that spouse that I've worked with, and I've worked with a lot of spouses that struggled to get out of bed. And I wanted to find a way to reach that spouse. And I think the Air Force and the military in general does an amazing job with resources and resiliency training and workshops. And they do a fantastic job with it. But what I kept seeing is that the spouses that I was most concerned about, those are the ones that weren't attending. Those are the ones that were isolating. Those are the ones that were staying in their home. And so I wanted to find a way. I can't multiply myself and go into everybody's home, which I would love to, but I tried to find a way to meet them where they're at. And the ones that, we're concerned about are the ones that are in their home. And so this resource really was a way and a mechanism to reach them where they're at, and they can start helping themselves. So that's kind of how it all came to fruition.
So I am so thrilled about what you're doing. It's something that I've been seeing for the past 10 years myself. And so I really relate to you and the frustration of seeing people in pain and seeing people struggle. And even just saying that, there's some things that come up in me that I know we're going to have to talk about, which is how to talk about the stress and the level of, accurately researched that this is a real thing. And yet there's this immediate feeling of like shaming that we should be doing better, or we shouldn't talk about it, or thinking about all the positive things, or thinking about all the benefits we have. And we just kind of talk ourselves out of what's really there. And I think that's why a lot of spouses are afraid to talk about it and be real with it. So we're going to talk about that in just a minute. But there was another key finding that you found that I thought was really interesting, that I think that we should also share at the beginning of this, which was that you found that this level of stress is consistent throughout every season of the military spouse journey, meaning, and I'm going to have you state actually what you found in the research, but from what you had said to me earlier, was that even our senior spouses, those of us that maybe have just started this lifestyle or maybe in the middle of it, we tend to think, surely it's going to get easier. Surely it's going to get better. Surely once we develop the right skills or go through these workshops or do these things that I'm going to find myself less stressed later, because some of those senior spouses sure do look less stressed, right? Or maybe they have some benefits we don't have. And what you found is actually the opposite, that regardless of season of life, the levels of stress were consistent. Is that correct?
Absolutely. And so again, looking at all those different demographics, I had my biases. So I thought going forward that I was going to find that seasoned spouse didn't have as significant stress levels. And I also looked at deployment time. So I looked at, in the course of 2 years, how long had the active duty member been out of the house, not just for deployment time, but training and exercises. And so I certainly thought those active duty members that were out of the home longest, so I had some that responded 24 months, that they were gone the entire time, I thought their stress levels were higher. And again, that wasn't the case. So what I found was that the spouse that had just entered the military and been in for a year, their stress levels, there was no significant difference between their levels being clinically significant and those that the longest was 26 years of a respondent. And the same with deployment time or time away from the home, those that had a spouse active duty member home for 24 months, there was no significant difference between their stress and one that had been gone 24 months. And at first I was like, oh my gosh, I didn't find anything. I was looking for this. But when I took a step back, I realized this is significant. What it's telling us is stress doesn't discriminate in the military spouse world in our culture, that it, regardless of if the active duty member's home or away, regardless of if you've been walking this walk for 26 years, that stress is constant, and it's a constant part of our lives that we have to address and deal with, because it is, every time we turn around a corner, it's going to be there again in a different way, a different fashion. It might present itself as a different stressor, but it's something that we have to endure. And so I think it's also validation for a lot of those senior spouses or seasoned spouses to say, I'm not okay, and giving them a space that it's all right that you've been doing it 26 years. You still don't have all the answers, nor should you. Or it could be your 17th PCS, and for some reason that PCS was extremely stressful because your child was a senior in high school. And that's okay to say, all the rest of them, I had it together, but this one I didn't. And it's giving them that space and that voice to say, yes, I'm a senior spouse. I've been doing it 26 years. And guess what? This PCS broke me. This one broke our family. And there's no shame in that, that this time and this point, it was stressful for me.
It makes me so glad to hear you say all of that, because I think that's something that we do have to do a better job at, is being able to say those tough things. Last season, I was very open with the recent PCS being really, really challenging for me because my kids are getting older. And this next one is proving to be even more challenging. And so I can definitely say that there has been some that are harder than others, but that stress continues and it evolves, but it doesn't mean that there's less stress involved. And so you're also here to give us some practical tips on what do we do next, right? And we are definitely going to dive into that, and hopefully for the majority of our conversation. But I think it's really important for us to unpack what actually are the stressors, because I think there's people out there that might feel a little crazy or might feel like they shouldn't be stressed out about something, when really part of your work is to validate their experience. And so what are the stressors that military spouses are facing? What are the things that, obviously we could say the big ones like PCSing and relocations and all of that, but what are you finding are the biggest stressors for spouses?
And it's, to me, there are those large stressors that we constantly talk about, but I think what we don't talk about as much is the ones that add up. And it's almost like layers that are building. And so it doesn't have to be this monumental, yes, when they get ready to deploy or they're coming back, obviously we know that time is stressful. But it's the little things, it's my child not having the words or not being emotionally intelligent enough to look at a friend that's PCSing and say, I want to see you again. I don't know where you're going. I don't know how to deal with this. And to me, that's crushing as a parent when she's, crying herself to sleep every night because she missed her best girlfriend, that we left in Japan. And so I think it's those other things that we don't talk about as common that we're just supposed to deal with as military spouses. It's the frustrations with finding a new job and not being underemployed or unemployed. It's seeing the emotions through our children, experiencing the military life through our children. I think it's more of the little ones that we don't talk about as often that build because we're afraid to say that those are significant, and they are significant because they add up as time goes on.
I completely agree. And this is something that's been on my mind for a very long time. The words that I've been trying to put to it is, yes, there's, Franklin Covey talks about how there's the big rocks and the little rocks, right? There's like the big rocks that you put in the jar that fill the jar that are things like the PCS and the employment issues and the big stuff that gets the most attention that everybody goes, well, sure, that's difficult, right? But there's also these little rocks. And in my mind, it is the dynamics within the culture itself that I think carries the most stressors that cause the most psychological discomfort for us as spouses. So I'd love to know what you think about this. And maybe this is some of what you're getting to, but it's things like having that weight of the emotional struggle of maybe that PCS being difficult, or watching your child go through losing that friend. And to me, the bigger stressor is that spouse feeling powerless to do anything about it. It's a feeling of powerlessness of, who do you talk to? How do you make a difference? How do you change something? There's this feeling of not being able to talk to anybody about it or have any control over the stress that you're going through. And then within the culture, this kind of just having to swallow it and just deal with it. And not to mention the dynamics within even the military family culture of whether or not you can even find that support and camaraderie with someone else and talk about that stress. Because I've heard spouses tell me, if I go and tell somebody that this is really hard for me, are they going to validate it and go, me too? Or are they going to say, well, you just got to get over it and pull up your big girl panties, right? This is what or I hear people say, I tell my family, and they go, well, this is what you signed up for, right? Or civilians going, well, just quit, right? Because in the civilian sector, you can leave a job that maybe you're unhappy with. Whereas there's also the dynamic of feeling like, well, we're aiming for that retirement, right? So there's nothing we can do. It's that feeling of powerlessness. So I'd love to know what your thoughts are on that. Perhaps maybe to validate my own feelings, but that's kind of what I'm seeing.
And it's such a great point. And that's why this resource was built with that understanding, is that I think one of the biggest issues is loss of control. And as military spouses and military families, we lack very little control over anything in our lives. So what the theory behind the book, and it's rational behavioral therapy, and that's who my mentor is trained me. And it's the realization and accepting the fact that we don't have control over the events in our lives, but there are things that we do and we can gain control over, and those are our thoughts and our behaviors. And so it's retraining ourselves to have more positive thoughts, and it's hard to do. And it's hard to do because of what we hear from other spouses in our community, as you brought up such great points in general, of instead of having positive thoughts about the military life, we kind of fall prey to and fall into that trap of negative talk a lot about it. This is another PCS. This is what we do. This is, it's never going to get better. He's going to go again, and this is just something I have to deal with. Instead of changing those thoughts associated with it. And again, as I kind of preface in the book, a lot of the tools within the book are intuitive. You would think they're just intuitive, but you have to consciously make a choice to practice them. So again, it's the ABCs of your emotions is what I call them. And, that event, it's very difficult to say, I don't have control. But we don't have control over a lot of the events. It's waiting, that anticipation in December where most of the time PCS orders drop, or you find out where you're going. And it's this anxiousness of where are we going next? And that changes so many things in it. And that excitement, yet that fear, and it's this cyclical thing that we go through. But that event itself, you don't have control over. And so you can sit back and reevaluate, what are my automatic thoughts? And a lot of times as spouses, we don't even realize what tape is running in our head all the time with it, because we've been immersed in this culture, in this community for so long that it's that tape or that constant self-talk that's playing. So how do I shift that? How do I really change my thoughts? Because again, research shows your thoughts, it is actually your thoughts that dictate your behaviors, not that event. It's really how you feel about that event and what you're thinking about that event that drives how you behave. So the book is trying to give you those tools to take a step back and say, and even more so in the military. And again, these tools are applicable to the world at large. And I encourage so many people that I've worked with outside of the military community as well. This is the foundation of what I believe helps individuals deal with stress. But I think more so with the military community, it's such a valuable tool because in our culture and our lifestyle, that event more than anything else, we lack control over. So it's then coming together and getting around, what can I control? What can I make a distinct conscious choice to change? And it's my thoughts. It's really sitting with myself and writing down when that event happened, what are your first three thoughts you had? You might not even realize what those automatic thoughts are. And again, the book kind of describes when those thoughts happen automatically, it's our attitudes. So it's a lot of things that are ingrained in us. And especially as military spouses, there are things that are just ingrained in our conscious thought that we don't even know are there. So when you sit down and say, okay, I just got this news, or I just got this information, or my child's upset because of this, and you write down your three initial thoughts, you'd be surprised sometimes what those are, because we don't consciously do that and take time to reflect on it. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And I remember back when I first started my mental health career, REBT was my favorite too. And it's still one of my favorites because it's so quick. At least I found that it was really helpful to get really down to the root thought, the root belief system that somebody's working out of. And if you can find that root belief or thought system, then you can really start to find some movement there. And the way that I always saw it was that, we can tend to feel like we have like 36 problems going on, right? But these root beliefs, these root thoughts they spread like cancer. Fear even spreads like cancer if they're lies that we believe or fears that we believe, and they impact so many areas of our life to the point that we feel like we have 36 different problems going on, but we can really trace it down to some really core thoughts and beliefs about how we see the event in our life, how we view relationships in our life, and what we believe about ourselves too. And so I'm so thrilled that you have applied this theory to our culture and to how we react to the culture. And I know that I personally am going to benefit from this resource as well, because I do definitely have these triggering thoughts or beliefs that make it even more difficult for me to adapt when I'm surprised by new information, new orders, or those things that I don't have control over. So I'm going to break this down just a little bit more, and it's going to sound, it's almost like I'm going into the nuances here for just a minute, but I'm doing it because I want those listening to really understand what it is that you're walking them through and the process that you're walking them through. So you talk about, so it's going to sound like I'm challenging you, not at all. I'm just breaking it down just a little bit more, but you talk about, that when we go through, let's say, this event that leaves somebody feeling powerless to control things, that sitting down and writing out those automatic thoughts. And we talk about kind of nailing down those thoughts and then using positive thinking and reframing and perspective, maybe to shift that in order for us to have a more positive perspective and to realize we actually do have control over how we behave in response to what's happened in our life. And so I can just feel somebody listening that's going, yeah, but that sounds like just slap a positive Band-Aid on it. And maybe they've gotten that from maybe other spouses that have said, you know what, you should be grateful, right? Let's just reframe it and be grateful for the benefits that you have, and that your spouse has a job, and that your kids have medical care, and just reframe it with positive thoughts. And I don't think that that's what you're saying. In fact, I think the nuance that I'd like for us to dive into a little bit is, what would you say in those first preliminary steps for that spouse to do about their emotions? Because when we say REBT, that E is emotions, right? So emotions is a huge part of this whole thing. And I think that our emotions and those feelings is where we experience validation and connection with others. Sitting in that pocket of messiness there for just a minute. Hi, everyone. Corey here. I love superheroes, and one of my favorite things to do is to lead service couples and individuals through strengths coaching. Kind of like discovering you have superpowers, you would be amazed at what you've been created to do. You just may not know it yet. I've led hundreds, if not thousands, through their strengths journey, and I've seen couples increase communication, reduce conflict, and my favorite is when I see a military or first responder spouse finding their identity again after years of revolving around the service lifestyle. Strengths coaching can be done online and is not counseling, so we can work together regardless of where you are today or are going tomorrow. As a certified Gallup Strengths coach, I can help you see your worth again and even help you see your spouse with new eyes. Head on over to life-giver.org and go to Work with Corey to schedule your first session. I'm giving all of my listeners 15% off their first session with me just to try it out. Simply use the promo code FIRST at checkout. Thanks for listening, and thanks for spreading the word about the podcast. And so what would you encourage a spouse to do with those initial feelings that are coming up?
As they're writing them down? Yeah.
We're in the process of what you are introducing for them as a new tool,
right?
For
and again, it's 8 weeks. So and we build on it throughout the resource. So again, a lot our spouses are crazy smart, which I love. But I'm giving them a piece that they build on every week. And so really, the first week is introducing rational behavioral therapy and the concept of it. And the next week is the ABCs of our emotions. So in this resource, I am building up to that big tool that I'm saying that we get to later in the book is a rational self-analysis. And so it's more than just, as you said, waking up and the sun is shining and birds are chirping and life is grand. And I should be blessed that I have food, that there are people that are poor and starving. It's way different than that. So it's not just slapping that false positivity. It's actually looking at, so as I said, with that example of writing down your first 3 thoughts, and those emotions, it's labeling, are they positive? Are they negative? Are they neutral? And it's okay to have neutral ones as well, right? So, and again, within the book, I walk you through the difference in what those look like applied to the military spouse. But then you do a camera check is what I call it. So it's taking that event, write down, and again, the guide, the resource walks you through how to do all this, write down the actual facts about that event. Now go back and look at those thoughts and how can you change them? So instead of, if I'm going out and I did a job interview and oh my gosh, I couldn't find a job when we were in Japan. So I didn't work the first 2 years and it was very frustrating. I wanted to continue working and for me, it gives me purpose. It's a way that I connect with individuals. And so I was so frustrated and I found myself that internal tape was playing, or those negative thoughts of, I'm not good enough. I'm not getting the job because I don't interview well, or I'm not enough for the job. And so when I'm writing those down, instead of saying I'm not good enough, it's saying, you know what, Kendra, it's not that you're not good enough. I am good enough. I need to consistently keep trying. It might not have been a good fit, this job, but it's not slapping that Band-Aid on. I should just love Japan and just be so excited that I'm here and experience the culture and just, be content staying at home. It's saying, what do I want? How do I change that thought from I'm not good enough to you are good enough, but rationally think that job wasn't the right fit because of 2 reasons. For me, one of them that I interviewed for, it wasn't the right fit because it wouldn't allow me to be with my children. So it's rationally thinking through, and it can still be that thought of I am good enough, but this wasn't the right fit, and that's okay.
Which, can I pause you for just a second? Because part of that was also, it would have taken you away from your children at that season of life. And that could have happened in Georgia as much as it could have happened in Japan, that it wasn't just because you had gone to Japan.
Absolutely. I can't even tell you how many job interviews, I've been on. And so it can happen to any of us anywhere. And I love when I was talking about this and you bring that up. A lot of people say, well, but overseas, you should do another research on overseas because clearly that's more stressful. And I said, yes. However, again, step back and say, I met a spouse that they said this, I don't enjoy being with my family. So this has been the best move ever because it's giving me that separation. I don't get along with family members well. So I have loved this overseas tour. It's everything that I ever could have thought of and wished for. So that's kind of, again, those biases that we're coming up with sometimes within the military community. But I digress on that. But I think that's a valid point, that there's a lot of characteristics and demographics that people bring up, and they say, well, but this has got to be more stressful for this particular spouse in this situation. I said, it could be, but it's all relative, because what's stressful to me might not be stressful to you, and vice versa.
And so I know I interrupted you there. You were talking about how you had, at least in that scenario, you had applied written down what your initial thoughts were about that, your initial beliefs on that, and then kind of looked at the facts of the situation, right? And what was actually true about those circumstances.
You have to, that's why it's called that camera check. It's writing down. We forget how much opinion we insert in there, and how much subjective information we add into our minds. And when you're really objective, and as a camera would play it or record it, write down the actual facts associated with that event that happened, that really helps you be able to see how much opinion you're adding to that event that happened. The fact was, there was only one position available for the job that I interviewed. And so it wasn't that it wasn't my self-worth, but it was more so it wasn't a good fit for a lot of different reasons. And so it's having to think through, write down those actual events, the details associated with it, and rationally apply your thoughts. And so I was having negative thoughts, but I sat back and said, you know what, Kendra, here are 4 more details that I wasn't allowing myself to accept. And these are true of that situation. So it's okay. It's okay that this one didn't work out, but then I still need to make a conscious choice, because if I really want to work, I need to make a conscious choice to go out and interview again and do it again, if that's what I want, if that's what I truly want. But you can fall prey to that negative tape playing in your head of, I'm not good enough, and I didn't get that particular job, or that didn't work out for me because directly applying to my self-worth. And so it's so important to take that step back and do the rational self-analysis, which again, there's several key components of, but primarily looking at that event and writing down just the facts. And I've done this with so many clients and spouses, and it's so interesting because they'll not argue, but sometimes come back and that is factual. I said, is that truly factual what you put down? Yeah, that's fact. That's actually, and I said, no, tease it apart even further. Write down as a camera would play it. And they're like, oh yeah, I did kind of say he was angry. I said, was he really angry? Did he say, I am angry? Or again, was it the way you interpreted it? And it's forcing yourself to really step back and say, we have those automatic things that we insert, and it's really hard to tease it apart. So I think that's the biggest step, is learning how to take that event and write down concrete facts, and then associate those thoughts that you're having about it.
That's such a great point. And I actually was going to ask you about that same thing, because it's kind of getting into cognitive behavioral when we talk about what's fact versus opinion, right? And sometimes that feels very gray. And so I'd like for us to just for a moment, camp out there, because there's, I think it is sometimes easier. I'm making this up as I go, as I'm thinking about it, but I think it's sometimes easier for us to distinguish fact or opinion in our own lives than with entities outside of ourselves. And so, for example, when I'm talking about, let's say, finding that job, and what I believe about myself, it might be a little bit easier to go, is it really that I'm, not good enough? Or is it just that this job, I'm not a good fit for this job, fact or opinion? But for example, I had a spouse that said to me the other day, and I've heard this so many times from spouses who are navigating this building resentment that's happening over time as they're in this lifestyle. And I heard a spouse say to me what I remember saying to myself a few years ago when I wrote Sacred Spaces. And that is, I have so much resentment, but I just don't know where to put it. I don't know if I should be angry at the military because it doesn't feel right for me me to be angry at my husband. And they're trying to nail down, where's this resentment? Who's to blame, I guess, for this resentment, for this difficulty in my life? And I don't know where to place that anger. And so when we're talking about, let's say, the idea of, well, the military, in relocations, or whether or not my spouse deploys, they don't care about my feelings. This is what the military needs, the needs of the military, right? So they don't care about me and my family. And asking ourselves, is that fact or is that opinion, right? And trying to distinguish between, do they fully not care about the spouse? Well, on some degree, the fact is it's about war. It's about mission readiness. It is about employing the soldier, not the family, right? So there is a point in there where it's the fact of they have to care more about the mission and care about the soldier and they're fit for duty than they have to care about the family. Absolutely. But we also have tons of programming that says that they do care. So trying to distinguish, who, whether or not that's fact or fiction. Does that make sense? So I wonder if it's a little bit more of a struggle there when we're talking about the disruption that's happening and the stress that's happening in a spouse's life on whether or not the military is the cause of that and whether or not that's fact or fiction. Does that make sense, or fact or opinion?
It does. And I think it's really hard to tease those apart. And that's why it does require constant practice, because the fact and fiction are sometimes really close. So the more you practice it and kind of write down the actual events, the more that you'll become more aware of how often you're that individual that you're inserting more of that fictional or opinions or kind of emotion based, right? Instead of just looking at the facts. And that is something that I hear so many spouses talk about, is that resentment, and how do you lessen it, or how do you not allow it to fester? And I think a lot of it goes back to this theory of the ABCs of your emotions, is that you are in the military. That is a fact. It is mission readiness. That is a fact. Do they care about military families? They do. That is a fact. So do they perfectly align? No, kind of those facts are data that you look at and say, it might not always feel that way, but you have to go back to your thoughts and say, and what are the facts? They do have programming out there. They are trying hard. Look at the growth that we've made with military spouses with underemployment and unemployment. So there are people taking notice that are championing for military spouses. So that is a fact. So you have to go back to those constantly. And when those fleeting thoughts come back of, they don't care about me, they don't care about my family, they don't care about that we just moved here and we have to move again. They don't care about the fact that they lost, our entire truck full of household goods. The fact is they are trying their hardest to get us resources. They are constantly working towards what can we do for the military family and the military spouses. But there are events that still happen that the military don't have control over necessarily. So I think it's a really important exercise to do, anybody to do in our daily lives, is going back to, is this fact? Go back to those things that and I think that's in a journal. I often have clients and spouses write down and keep those facts journals, right? So when you have that constant list going, you go back to the facts and you read them again and say, I know this is a truth. So read those and have those continually playing in your head when the other ones start creeping in.
I love what you're doing, because I think that this resource is helping spouses acknowledge the areas that they feel out of control in, and then giving their power back. Yes. It's giving them the ability to go, I do have more control over at least myself and my thoughts and my behaviors. When the rest of the world external to me feels out of my control, that there is something I actually have control over. And it's the most powerful thing we could actually control and have influence in. And like turning on a lamp in the room, I think it has incredible influence. And this sounds like a terrible metaphor, but now that I've said that, like that one lamp may never move, right? It doesn't move from where it is in the room, but it has incredible influence in the light that it sheds throughout that room, right? And so being able to control you and where you are and what's happening within you, it feels like you don't have an impact on things happening outside of you, but you really do.
It's powerful. It is. And so I kind of talk about that in the last chapter of the book, is also, talking about how we can be an example for our military children and, for our active duty spouses that might be struggling as well. It is powerful. So you can be that light. And if you are training yourself as a military spouse to go through these tools, your children will take notice. The active duty member, your spouse may be struggling, and how are you changing your mindset with that? Well, I've kind of been doing these activities. And so, and it's telling other spouses about it and acknowledging that, I've been there before. It has been a struggle, but I'm working through it. And this is something that now I can gain control over. I think modeling that behavior is so important. So if, we have more spouses that are trying this, and I do want to make a quick, this resource is not meant to replace all the amazing things that are out there right now. So if, I've had a spouse that read through it and said, if I was still at clinical levels of stress, is this going to make my stress go away? Well, I want to be very clear that there is still a space for professional help. And I do want to encourage spouses that are in that area or in that space to get professional help. But what I'm sure you see constantly, and I see all the time, is that spouses aren't reaching out for that professional help. So it's the realization that there are MPLACs out there and mental health professionals and clinicians. But if you are unable or unwilling to use those resources and tools, which we're seeing is a lot of the case, then this is another tool that at least give you it give you an opportunity to help yourself within your home.
Absolutely. And I would say it's something that you have written, it's by a professional, you having this doctorate and this background in research and also in practice, but it is from a professional that's putting it in your hands into your home without you even stepping outside of your home. And it walks you through the basics of developing those coping skills. Right. And you may go through this resource and it was everything that you needed it to be, and it got you unstuck, and it reframed some things in your life to where you have now those skills to handle whatever is coming your way that's difficult. Or you may also go through this and it did give you a basic foundation of what you needed, but you still find yourself stuck, or you maybe still find yourself entertaining those negative thoughts or the anxiety or the beliefs that are not encouraging you to cope well in the lifestyle. And you may find yourself really stalling. And that's a good sign for you to go to that next level of support and take that resource or take these things that you're struggling with and then have those one-on-one conversations with somebody to help figure out why you're stuck or figure out what those roadblocks actually are. And so I think it's fantastic what you're doing. And I think that it really gives and arms people with the right tools that they might very much be lacking, because I don't know a whole lot of spouses out there that are hitting a wall, that, an obstacle in this lifestyle, that are going, let me take a look at my thoughts and beliefs and feelings about this and reframe it with, we're not given those coping skills growing up or in school, or even at the beginning of this lifestyle. Are we armed with the right skills that we need to actually cope?
And it's hard to do, right? I mean, it's difficult because you have to be very real with yourself, and you have to be alone with yourself in the sense of, what am I really, be honest. What am I really telling myself? Is this what I think I'm telling myself? Or is this actually that tape that's playing in my head? And that's hard to do, to sit with yourself. And I find that a lot with individuals. It's very hard to sit alone with those thoughts, because you have to admit that that's actually what's playing in your head. And that's why, again, this resource is it's giving you those baby steps to work through it, to build on it. Because as you perfectly put, a lot of individuals haven't been challenged to do that before. So I'm hoping that going through this, again, it gives us spouse that's sitting in their home just a chance of something more tangible to work through. But the secondary goal of this resource really is for a group of spouses to sit down and do it together. I had a beta group that went through it, and they actually went through all the reflection questions virtually. So they did a Google Hangouts on Tuesday nights. And I see potential in spouses doing this virtually as well, building that social connectiveness, because that is one of the greatest combaters to isolation and to suicide ideation, is building social connectedness. So really the secondary effect of this is hoping that spouses come together and form a group of 8 or 10 individuals that sit down together, have these real honest discussions. Because as I'm sure you know, the most powerful therapy that I've ever been involved with is group therapy. Because that person sitting across from you says, I've been where you have been. It hurts really bad, but I'm telling you, I'm 6 months out for it. I'm doing better now. There is a light at the end of the tunnel. I've walked it. You can do it. I know you can. And that's more powerful than a clinician or a therapist sitting in front of you giving you tools, because I might not be able to relate because I haven't been in that specific place before. So really this is meant for us to be having those conversations through that 8 weeks, so that we're talking about very real things of when you've been set back, when you've chosen to persevere, working through that military spouse life cycle. When have you strengthened yourself, and how have you strengthened yourself? Sharing that connectiveness. So then once you finish this study, 6 months later, you find yourself set back again. I'm going to reach out to one of those spouses that I've shared a very real part of me. And that's the secondary effect that I'm hoping that comes from this, whether virtually or within homes. I hope that we build more of that as spouses, to build each other up and to support each other, and to validate it's hard, but you can do it. And here's how I can help you do it. Right. So how can we be part of that?
And this is what I was going to actually ask you anyways. And you went right there, which is, when somebody goes through this process, what is the role of authenticity with other military spouses in the future? In other words, as spouses become those senior leaders that are then working with new military spouses who are just coming in with those lack of coping skills, how does this change the conversation in the military spouse space, and how generations actually address the difficulty in this lifestyle? How does this change the conversation that we're seeing in the spouse culture?
I think it makes that seasoned spouse more real. I think when they are part of the conversation, and they're part of the dialogue of saying, and they're in that experience with those new spouses coming in, it requires them to be authentic and say, hey, I've seen so many younger spouses respond to more senior spouses saying, I'm struggling today, right now, instead of having it all together. I think that's an important part that is going to have to take place with this, is having brave spouses, but our seasoned spouses are brave. And I've had within the book are all those anecdotal stories, and I had over 30 spouses that I interviewed that wanted to be part of this. And the more I asked, like, tell me when it's been rough for you. And I had one seasoned spouse say, you mean in past tense or current tense? Because let me tell you what's going on right now, And I think it's challenging our seasoned spouses as well to say, it's okay for you to say, you're not okay right now. There's no judgment in that. And there's more to learn from that person standing bravely saying, I'm struggling today, right now, on December 23rd. And I'll tell you why. I think there's more value in a younger spouse hearing that, because they can also say, but 6 months ago, I was thriving. I was doing great. And guess what? 6 months from now, I know in this life cycle, I can be thriving again. But right now, I'm restoring. I got set back, and I'm in a rough space, and I'm being real, and I'm being honest about it. And I'm going to sit in this space for a while, and I'm going to be okay, because I'll get back there again. I know I can. But the more we allow those senior spouses to kind of be have those conversations, the more there is to learn from our younger spouses coming in.
When I just have this vision of a senior spouse or seasoned spouse who's gone through this material, who has really gotten into the habit of walking through these steps and has been applying it. Because this is any new tool that you take on, any new skill takes practice, or it's never going to be part of our inner working, right? So it's when you actually learn something new and do it again and again. And I just have this vision of this senior spouse approaching this new spouse and saying, this is a rough season for me too, and having all that authenticity you just described. But then, because they have been practicing this skill, being able to say, but here is what I know is true. And this is what I'm reminding myself of what is true. And so therefore, this is what I have to believe about it. And this is what I'm going to tell myself about it. And this is what I'm challenging myself now with this level of thinking to help me get through something difficult. And that doesn't mean that I'm not going to get triggered on certain days to feel those feelings again, and that I won't have to go through that process of thinking to pull myself there to this healthier place. But I just see in this vision, right, this seasoned spouse walking through that verbally with that new spouse to be able to not only be authentic with what they're going through and give words and validate what that new spouse is feeling, but to model this process just a little bit better, to not discount or minimize what that new spouse is feeling, to not just answer with the end product of what's been going on in that seasoned spouse's mind, but instead to model walking through that thinking process, which I think is so much healthier and gives voice to so much more, and also gives that new spouse hope, because they have been validating their feelings, validated in, what is fact, mentored in what is fact versus opinion, because that's what seasoned spouses offer, is perspective on fact versus opinion. Yeah. And that's what we need a whole lot more as our seasoned spouses, to go, I know this is what you're feeling and the assumptions that you can make based off of what you're seeing, but here's the actual facts of what's going on. And that's, I think, what we need a whole lot more in this culture.
I do. And that's, and again, the more of those spouses that kind of rally around this and learn it. And I do hope to do kind of a train the trainer type concepts with this resource, so that I have more individuals that have gone through, practice it, and become well versed in it, because it'll multiply. And as you said, modeling that, and then sitting with that spouse saying, okay, let's work through this together, and show me what thoughts you've had, and being able to sit next to them and do that, I think is really important. But yes, I would love kind of the train the trainer type idea with it, to have more of those ambassadors out there saying, this is how we can come together, and this is how it will make a difference, and how it's made a difference with me. I can't wait. I'm so excited for spouses to read this and come back and say, this is changed right now. It changed what I'm going through right now. It helped me just a little bit more get through what I'm going through. And I had an editor, a professional editor, that I actually selected, that's not a military spouse, to read this book as well. And I loved her response, because she came back to me and she said, Kendra, I'm separated from my fiance right now because of, various reasons of work and employment. But your book actually helped me rationalize through the facts associated with the choices that we've made, and that I was having a lot of negative thoughts playing in my head. So I'm so excited for more spouses to get knowledgeable on this, and to practice it and put it into practice, and to see kind of the ripples effects of it. It's very exciting for me.
I'm excited with you and for you. If I had a whole other hour, I would unpack even more. You have a great story of why you named this resource what you did. And so those that are listening, it's called Wake Up, Kick Ass, Repeat, A Guide to Self-Perseverance Within the Military Spouse Life Cycle. We're going to put links in there where you can have access to her resource and some of what she's doing. I think in closing, Kendra, if there is somebody listening that's really struggling right now, you've been so encouraging through this whole episode anyways, but if there's somebody that's maybe struggling today, maybe it's that spouse that is having a hard time getting out of her house, what message would you want to give to her today?
It will it can and will get better. There are tools for you. That's the goal is helping you be able to help yourself in that situation, because you are a strong, capable individual that can do great things. But sometimes you can't see that, and it's very blurry with where you're at. So I'm trying to help clear that up for you, that you are capable, that you can do this, and to give you that tangible tool that you can hold in your hands to help yourself to better social and emotional health.
Kendra, thank you so much for joining me today. Thank you for your encouragement and for being passionate about others, for using the talents and gifts that you've been given to serve this culture. It is absolutely worth it. And the amount of work that you've put into it is worth it. And I can't wait for how it's going to change somebody's life and so many other lives because of their ability to take it to others and share it. So thank you so much for joining me. And I can't wait to see what happens with you and with this for the next year. So thank you.
Thank you so much. It's been such an honor to be here today and to talk to you. And you've been so supportive. And so I greatly appreciate you. And again, very excited to see where this goes.
Thank you for listening to the Life Giver podcast. If you're enjoying these episodes, please share the podcast with other service couples that may benefit from the show. If you're feeling especially grateful, head on over to patreon.com/lifegiver or find the link in today's show notes where for just a couple of dollars, you can help breathe life into more service families. If you'd like more information about me or Life Giver, head on over to CoreyWeathers.com or life-giver.org.